Okay, we are still reading The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams, and this is chapter 26. The night the ship crash landed onto an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet which circled a small, unregarded yellow sun in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy. In the hours preceding the crash, Ford Prefect had fought furiously, but in vain, to unlock the controls of the ship from their preordained flight path. It had quickly become apparent to him that the ship had been programmed to convey its payload safely, if uncomfortably, to its new home, but to cripple itself beyond all hope of repair in the process. Its screaming, blazing descent through the atmosphere had stripped away most of its superstructure and outer shielding, and its final inglorious belly flop into a murky swamp had left its crew only a few hours of darkness during which to revive and offload its deep frozen and unwanted cargo. For the ship began to settle almost at once, slowly upending its gigantic bulk in the stagnant slime. Once or twice during the night, it was starkly silhouetted against the sky as a burning meteors, the detritus of its descent, flashed across the sky. In the gray pre-dawn light, it let out an obscene, roaring gurgle and sank forever into the sinking depths. When the sun came up that morning, it shed its thin, watery light over a vast area, heaving with wailing hairdressers, public relations executives, opinion pollsters, and the rest, all clawing their way desperately to dry land. A less strong-minded sun would probably have gone straight back down again, but it continued to climb its way through the sky, and after a while, the influence of its warming rays began to have some restoring effect on the feebly struggling creatures. Countless numbers had, unsurprisingly, been lost to the swamp in the night, and millions more had been sunk down with the ship. But those who survived still numbered hundreds of thousands, and as the day wore on, they crawled out over the surrounding countryside, each looking for a few square feet of solid ground on which to collapse and recover from their nightmare ordeal. Two figures moved farther afield. From a nearby hillside, Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent watched the horror of which they could not feel a part. "Filthy, dirty tricks to pull," muttered Arthur. Ford scraped a stick along the ground and shrugged. "An imaginative solution to a problem, I'd have thought," he said. "Why can't people just learn to live together in peace and harmony?" said Arthur. Ford gave a loud, very hollow laugh. 42, he said with a malicious grin. "No, doesn't work. Never mind." Arthur looked at him as if he'd gone mad, and seeing nothing to indicate to the contrary, realized it would be perfectly reasonable to assume that this, in fact, had happened. "What do you think will happen to them all?" he said after a while. "In an infinite universe, anything can happen," said Ford. "Even survival. Strange but true." A curious look came into his eyes as they passed over the landscape, and then settled again on the scene of misery below them. "I think they'll manage for a while," he said. Arthur looked up sharply. "Why do you say that?" he said. Ford shrugged. "Just a hunch," he said, and refused to be drawn any further questions. "Look," he said suddenly. Arthur pointed his finger. Down among the sprawling masses, a figure was moving, or perhaps lurching would be more accurate description. He appeared to be carrying something on his shoulder. As he lurched from the prostrate form, he seemed to wave whatever the something was at them in a drunken fashion. After a while, he gave up the struggle and collapsed in a heap. Arthur had no idea what that was meant to be. "Movie camera," said Ford, "recording the historic moment." "Well, I don't know about you," said Ford after a moment, "but I'm off." He sat a while in silence. After a while, this seemed to require comment. When you say you're off, what do you mean exactly?" said Ford. "Good question," said Ford. "I'm getting total silence." Looking over his shoulder, Arthur saw that he was twiddling with knobs on a small black box. Ford had already introduced this box to Arthur as a sub-etha sensomatic. But Arthur had merely nodded absently and not pursued the matter. In his mind, the universe still dived into two parts: the Earth and everything else. The Earth, having been demolished to make way for a hyperspace bypass, meant that this view of things was a little lopsided. But Arthur tended to cling to that lopsidedness as being his last remaining contact with his home. Sub-etha sensomatics belonged firmly in the everything else category. "Not a sausage," said Ford, shaking the thing. "Sausage?" thought Arthur to himself as he gazed listlessly at the primitive world about him. "What I wouldn't give for a good earth sausage." "Would you believe," said Ford in exasperation, "that there are no transmissions of any kind within light years of this benighted tip? Are you listening to me?" "What?" said Arthur. "We're in trouble," said Ford. "Oh," said Arthur. This sounded like month-old news to him. "Until we pick up anything on this machine," said Ford, "our chances of getting off this planet are 0. It may take some freak standing wave effect in the planet's magnetic field, in which case we just travel around and round till we find a clear reception area. Coming?" He picked up his gear and strode off. Arthur looked down the hill. The man with the movie camera had struggled back up to his feet just in time to film one of his colleagues collapsing. Arthur picked a blade of grass and strode off after Ford. And that, my darlings, is the end of chapter 26.